Well, a former South African president is going to jail next week, found guilty of contempt by the Constitutional Court. There is no further legal recourse for Jacob Zuma. His supporters claim this is a travesty, that the court was emotional, that the minority judgment is a sign that it's all unconstitutional. Let's get to the heart of the judgment now with constitutional law expert Professor Pierre de Vos from UCT. Prof, thank you so much for joining us. So, Zwanele Manyu, who speaks for Zuma's foundation, says it's a real problem that it wasn't a unanimous decision. Is it?
Well, if you want to make political spectacle or make hay out of it, yes, it's a problem because the unified judgment is obviously going to have more authority. It's going to be more difficult to criticize for those who want to criticize it. But from a legal perspective, of course, it happens every day. There's, if you look at the Constitutional Court, many judgments each year is not unanimous. There's going to be dissent, and that's a good thing because it shows that there's debate within the court, that the judges hold each other accountable, that they are doing so through reasoned argument, not through invective and fake news and the rest. And that's not really a bad thing. It shows that the law is actually working and the judiciary is working as it should work.
Let's dwell a little longer on this minority judgment, which is from Justices Turon and Jafta. There's a wonderful quote to start their minority judgment. I'm going to read it. And it says, "Great cases, like hard cases, make bad law. For great cases are called great, not by reason of their importance, but because of some accident of immediate, overwhelming interest, which appeals to the feelings and distorts the judgment." What do you make of that in the light of this focus today, across the world, in fact, of this huge judgment against the former president?
Well, that is a famous quote that especially if you're a legal academic, you keep in mind all the time because one wants to always game this out and think, okay, so this case, we support it now. For example, the Nkandla judgment was one of those judgments where critics also said, well, this was a judgment made for the moment, but we have to be careful what it actually is going to do in the future. So it's a little bit early to say, but I think as we go forward, the important question from a legal perspective is there really such a big difference between the majority and the minority judgment? And I'm saying that because on the minority judgment, the outcome would eventually have been the same because they said what they would have done, they would have given an imprisonment, but they would have suspended that on the condition that the former president testify before the commission. He has already said many times he will never testify, so he would have gone to jail in any case. So whether that means that whether we can discard that fact and say, well, the principle that you can sometimes send somebody to jail for contempt of court without first giving them the opportunity to comply with the court order, that's a matter that in time I think we're going to answer.
So it's fascinating because you were explaining to me before this interview that there's never been a direct imprisonment order before from the Constitutional Court. There has been a contempt of court ruling, or it's been upheld. So in that sense, it's sort of precedent setting, which I suppose is partly what the Apex Court does. But equally, could it not be used to argue, look, it's biased, it's just created to get to Jacob Zuma?
Yeah, actually, the Constitutional Court has previously said or suggested that it is possible for the court in a contempt matter to send somebody to jail. So they have said in the Pleco judgment that that is possible. So one of the arguments between the minority and the majority in this case was, well, did they really mean send somebody to prison without first giving them at least one more chance to comply with the court order or not? That is maybe up for debate. But the court has said, of course, they can send somebody to jail. The Constitutional Court can hear contempt matters. They can hear contempt matters as a court of first instance. That has all been confirmed in previous court judgments, so that in that sense, there's nothing new about this judgment.
All right. So I want to ask if there's any further legal recourse. I know you can't appeal what the Constitutional Court says, but I'm wondering about medical reasons, early parole, COVID concerns, and then what about a presidential pardon? I'm not sure if President Ramaphosa would at all be inclined, but are those options available to the former president?
Well, as we know from people like Shabu Sheikh, there's always options if you know the right people in the political sphere with power. But legally, there are not immediate options because the former president will have to go to prison. Then, of course, he might be eligible for parole after a certain time. If he is suddenly, mysteriously very sick, then he could get parole for medical reasons. And as you say, the pardon process, but that is a process that usually takes a year or 2 years. So by that time, the sentence would long have been served. So
all in all, your view, is this going to see the former president in jail before the 19th or before the 10th of July? And is it an important message that has been sent by the Apex Court today? Well, the majority judgment especially, but also the minority judgment, was very critical of the way in which former President Zuma had behaved, because it is a full frontal attack on the rule of law, on the constitution, on the democracy. And so they had very stern words for him, and also why the majority decided to impose a custodial sentence. It has to be implemented now, whether it will be done voluntarily or whether the state will have to do what they do in every case where somebody is sent to jail and the person doesn't want to go to jail. They just take him to jail or her to jail. We'll have to see, but it will happen. And whether one supports former President Zuma or not, it is a good thing that the law works and that the law is enforced. And of course, one can criticize a specific judgment. That is also good. I think that it is welcome that people would criticize the majority judgment, but that doesn't mean you are allowed not to obey the order that is then eventually made. All right. Well, thank you so much for chatting to us. That was constitutional law expert Professor Peter Vos from UCT.